we've got today as our first keynote speaker of our conference, we've got Dr. Becca Wilson, who is from the University of Liverpool. So Becca will be here today to talk around her work that she does additional to your daytime work of working at the University of Liverpool about inclusivity and accessibility. So it's predominantly focused on the higher education sector from the experience that Becca has already. And so without further ado, Becca, over to you.
My name is Dr. Rebecca Wilson, and I'm a research fellow at the University of Liverpool. And my research area is actually in the domain of data privacy. And I develop methods and software that help the sharing and use and visualization of sensitive health data for research purposes. So I'm really pleased to have been invited here today to talk to you all. It's a bit strange not being able to see anyone, as is the case with the current pandemic. We have to do a lot of these conferences and seminars virtually now. And basically, I'm just going to, I guess, talk you through about my journey on how I became a disability activist. And if you'd like to see a copy or download a copy of my slides, you can download them at, there's a link at the bottom of each of my slides, and that's where you can download these. So they're at bit.ly/move-2021. So I thought I'd first of all start off with just a little bit about my background, and I guess I would have what you would class a non-traditional career path in academia. So my background is geology. I basically selected geology as an undergrad degree because I absolutely loved being outdoors, hiking, climbing, pretty much walking through the forest, beach, mountain, all those kinds of things. And I was really interested in the history of the planet and also the future of the planet as well. And I had great aspirations as a child to basically become Indiana Jones, but in space. And so instead of searching for archaeological artifacts, I wanted to search for evidence of life on other planets. And so after my undergrad degree, I took on a PhD to analyse data from the first UK fully built space mission to Mars. Unfortunately, just before my PhD was due to start, the mission sadly crash landed, and so there obviously wasn't any data given back. And so I ended up pivoting my PhD into something that was entirely laboratory based. And I ended up analysing organic material that was locked inside asteroids and meteorites, trying to find out whether asteroids or comets could have delivered the organic materials necessary to start life on our planet and elsewhere in the solar system. Sadly, however, the year that I graduated from my PhD was the year that the global recession, banking crisis happened. And so my endeavours to become that Indiana Jones in space were completely thwarted, and I had to again pivot my career and take up research in another space. So I sidestepped into atmospheric chemistry, so in the chemical sciences. I guess where my undergrad degree was fieldwork based, my PhD was laboratory based, and now my first job was entirely computational. And I had to learn lots of new skills whilst I was in this job, basically skills that are the foundation of what is now known as data science. So learning to program and managing big data, analysing big data. And in this role, I analysed trends of ground-based pollutants across the whole of Europe. After that research post, I actually left active research in academia for around 3 years, and I worked on projects that were commercialising the space research in my university at the time, which was at the University of Leicester. And then alongside that job, I had probably what has been my favourite job in my career to date, which was working as a project scientist for the National Space Academy. And that's a project that's run out of the National Space Centre in Leicester. And in this National Space Academy, I actually helped to develop and deliver Key Stage 3 to Key Stage 5 revision masterclasses across biology, chemistry, physics, and geography, as well as teacher CPD. But the kicker was that all the teaching materials we created and the revision materials we created used space science and planetary science as the context for learning. there we go. There's some photos of me there participating in some masterclasses and things. I would say that also during this time, I did have the opportunity to support masterclasses for SEND students that were studying applied science. And also I did deliver one masterclass on space theme to children in a residential facility. And at the time, that was a real eye-opener for me, because I didn't really have any awareness of sort of different sorts of disabilities, learning disabilities and specific communication disabilities and things. And I worked really hard to adapt my masterclass to ensure that I could account for the restrictions in place in the facility in terms of the types of experiments the students could do, and also to account for the varying abilities of the students as well. And it was absolutely amazing to hear the comments and feedbacks from the students after that particular masterclass. The students during the lesson were super engaged, really excited, and were totally focused and involved in all of the activities. They really they really were super engaged. And yeah, after the event, the kids were talking about that particular masterclass for quite a few weeks after delivering it. And so I think that I just wanted to make the point that as a scientist that goes out and delivers outreach in schools, it is possible to engage a wide range of children in this sort of outreach work. It's just that you need to work with people that support those children and consider any of the restrictions around the sorts of activities that you can deliver. So after that, I had the opportunity to come back into research, and I joined a health data science group that develops software and tools for the safe and secure use of health data in research. And I've been in that group ever since. It's been about 10 years that I've been in the same research group. Sadly, however, for me, about a year into my, I guess, my final research area that I've decided to specialise in, I developed a rare neurological condition. And over the course of about a year, my whole life was just turned upside down. The neurological condition left me with a mobility impairment. And so now I'm an electric wheelchair user, and I also use a stick. And obviously it's left me with daily symptoms that I have to deal with, including things like fatigue. And also my memory has also been affected. And all these sorts of things kind of do impact, I guess, my working life as well. And when this first happened, I did have a fleeting moment where I thought to myself, should I give up work? Should I retire on what my pension classes as being incapacitated? But I'm really stubborn, and having studied for 8 years and built up work experience for 5 years after my postgraduate degree, I'd worked really hard to get to where I was, and I just refused to believe that I was too disabled to pursue a career in academic research. And basically, with the support of my family and the great colleagues that I had, and even an even greater boss that I had, I was able to navigate all of this and continue having my academic career. But the thing that really became obvious to me almost straight away after I started identifying as disabled was how different my working life was, like pre-disability or then, how it is now and post-disability. Overnight, suddenly there were lots of barriers and obstacles that were suddenly put in my way, and there were lots of things that non-disabled colleagues just didn't have to deal with. And so I've used this lovely picture to represent what I feel my job or career was like pre-disability then. And to me, looking back, it really feels like it was this golden utopia of productivity, freedom. It was very stress-free. And, that then, I suppose, pre-disability, I feel like I have never knowingly been discriminated against due to, for example, my gender or ethnicity. I feel like I was an overachiever, and I was super organized. I was able to deliver a lot of high performance metrics and accomplished a lot of things in my career. And really, the sky was the limit. A picture that I've chosen to represent my career now, or post-disability, I suppose, is a scene from the Game of Thrones, because I feel like post-disability, I've been fighting battles on many fronts. And also, often I'm kind of on my own. So that's me there on the rock. And suddenly things that happen in your personal life have a massive impact in your working life, whether it's health-related appointments or whether it's sort of disability administration, like, for example, you haven't renewed your blue badge, which then means that you can't get a disabled parking permit at work, or you can't park in accessible bays when you're going to meetings in other buildings. And I feel like since becoming disabled, every day I experience disability discrimination, whether it's in life, in my career, in my job sector. And it is a struggle to keep up with sort of non-disabled peers in the academic space in terms of the performance metrics that you are judged by. And the reality is that in order to, I guess, be competitive for new jobs and promotion opportunities, progression opportunities, you need to still exceed the performance of non-disabled peers. And I often say that being a disabled academic, it's so ultra competitive, and it really is pretty much like being a professional para-athlete. And so, yeah, when after becoming disabled, there was this realization that there is a glass ceiling. There are barriers, there are traps. It sometimes feels like you're in your career trying to navigate the equivalent of a Tough Mudder assault course, and that the system is designed to prevent you from succeeding. I guess I just wanted to give some examples of kind of like everyday challenges, I guess, in my career. And these really, I guess, set the scene as to why I started to become much more vocal and get into sort of more activism around ableism in academia. So I think that there's a huge amount of administrative and time burden for disabled employees in the higher education sector. And some of these are relevant also to disabled employees in other sectors. You find yourself just spending time and energy organising and chasing, for example, adjustments at your own organisation, adjustments at other organisations when you visit them, for example, or if you're working from a different location. And every time this takes a little bit of time away from your actual day job. Trying to get support from things like DWP Access to Work scheme, which is there to support disabled employees in work. This can be actually a really lengthy process. It's not a quick thing to turn around. I think my shortest application from submission to being awarded approval for funding, for example, for workplace assistance or something, was 1.25 years. It just takes a really long time. And then when you do get awarded access to work support, you have to file paper-based claims every month, and it just takes a really long time. It's you also have to scan and take a record of everything that you're making in case it gets lost in the post, for example. And finally, every meeting that I attend outside of my office, I need to draw up a personal evacuation plan. And now this is something that I suppose in probably the first couple of years of being a wheelchair user, I hadn't really given much thought. I had done a personal evacuation plan for my actual office because that's part of my just part of my job, is that I have to do that. But I hadn't considered what happens when I go to other meetings in other buildings or in different locations, different cities, etc. And there was one meeting in Manchester where the fire alarm went off and we had to evacuate the building. But the staff in that building were actually told they weren't allowed to get the evacuation chair to evacuate me from the building. And it was no fault of the staff, it was just the nature of the particular fire incident, in that it was a chemistry lab that was nearby that had accidentally created some explosive materials, and that laboratory sat on a mains gas line alongside the building that I was attending a conference in. And just because of the urgency of that particular hazard and the risk, they were trying to evacuate as quickly as possible. And so I ended up having to be carried out by staff, and my wheelchair having to be carried out as well. of the building. So now I always make sure that I have one of these plans in place before I attend a meeting. Other sorts of everyday challenges are that essentially military planning is required, military level, planning is required to attend any meetings or conferences in person. I've got a picture here of me in Paris at a conference, and pretty much trouble all started on day one. Prior to the conference, I had checked with them that the venue was wheelchair accessible and that I could actually access, for example, the spaces where the talks were occurring, and I was assured that the venue was wheelchair accessible. And I turned up at this museum, and the entrance is actually this door here, and there's a flight of 4 stone steps to get in, and there's no wheelchair accessible entrance. In the end, I convinced the security guard to open the car entrance and the barriers so that I drove in through the car entrance to get in. But the problem was that basically that first trying to get into the building set the tone for the rest of the week pretty much. This was the access to the registration desk, which was down a flight of steps, and there was no lift. Luckily, I had a travel assistant with me. There was a colleague basically from my research group who was also attending the conference, and so they registered me. And the very first thing of the day was to attend a poster session and lunch, which was up 2 flights of stairs. I could only photograph the first set, and again there was no lift. And then this was my viewpoint, trying to get into the lecture theatres for the keynote talks and all the presentations for the day, and it was just impossible. So I didn't attend anything. And I remember posting this post on social media, at the end of day one, saying, so after a completely unworkable day, I went to see if I can even get into any of the other rooms for the rest of the conference. There is one lift to give access to all the other rooms, and the lift is broken. And by that point in time, after hearing that the lift was broken and there was no possibility of it being fixed, I actually considered just walking out and coming back to the UK, as I missed so many talks, and I'd missed meetings that were pre-arranged with people in speaker sessions as well. And so, as you can imagine, how this makes you feel dealing with these everyday challenges, well, a lot of the time I would say that it makes you feel like this Edvard Munch painting. You feel like you're alone screaming into the void. You're incredibly stressed a lot of the time and utterly exhausted. And the reality is that it does not have to be like this. So over time, I got quite angry with the kind of lack of equity and disability inclusion in the higher education sector from a staff perspective. And so I decided to channel all that into trying to find solutions in order to make things better, basically. And as the saying goes, if you want something done, you've got to do it yourself. And so I started thinking about how I could change things locally, starting small and improving things just for within my own organisation or for disabled staff and students in my own organisation, and then progress slowly to influencing things nationally. And so the first thing that I did was I joined the Disabled Staff Network at my employer, and at subsequent employers, I've always done this as well. And where one doesn't exist, I start them. And there are huge benefits of joining sort of peer-led diversity networks. You can basically receive support from people who have had similar experiences to yourself. And when I first moved to becoming a wheelchair user, it was other staff in the Disabled Staff Network that actually taught me how to drive my wheelchair. No one teaches you this. You're kind of just left to your own devices. You have to try and figure out how to open doors or keep doors open with an elbow and things like that, how to park at a table as well when you're attending a meeting. And so this is what I learned from the peers in that network. And there was a lot of comfort that I received in realizing that I wasn't alone, that other people had been through similar experiences to me, both in terms of the health related side of things, and also in terms of facing the same sort of barriers and things that were in place within the higher education sector. And over time, belonging to these networks, I started to participate more, and I ended up leading one of these networks. And it meant that I could start empowering others. I took on an advisory role for other staff. I took on a mentorship role for other disabled staff and students. And even if it's helping with some of the basic things like access to work or personal independent payment applications. And the really big advantage is that within a diversity network, within the Stable Staff network, I got to work with other diversity networks in my organisation, and we actually grouped together to foster a culture of inclusion in our organisation. And this particular picture here is an example of an art installation at Newcastle University, where members of the Disabled Staff Network were photographed, a portrait, and our portrait sits there alongside in this public space where there are portraits of the other networks and also core staffing groups in the university, along with information about us. And I think it's about, what I liked about this particular project was about making, basically making, it's kind of like normalizing and making visible disabled people, the contribution of people from a diverse range of backgrounds to the working life of the university, and celebrating that. And I think that that helps with addressing what is actually a stigma around disability pride in academia. So after starting to address things in my own organisation, I turned my attention to my research domain and the higher education sector more generally. And I guess I was quite evangelical about this. Every conference and meeting that I participated in, I raised awareness for the organisers of those, not just about my own personal accessibility needs, but slowly over time, you know, a general accessibility needs for all delegates in a conference. And that horrific experience that I had in Paris has never been repeated again at that particular annual conference, and it has never been repeated again at any other meeting or conference that I've been to since. I started sharing my experiences on social media, particularly Twitter, using the hashtags everyday ableism and academic ableism. And there's a lot of, I guess, colleagues and peers in this space that are doing the same. And they can be also a fountain of knowledge when you're trying to find solutions to particular issues that you might be having. Through basically the social media sort of interaction, my friends and colleagues from previous jobs and universities that I worked in started contacting me to seek advice. And this was brilliant because there essentially started being this like ripple effect where, you know, my own experiences were getting them to challenge the way that things were being done and trying to make improvements for their own staff and students in their respective organisations. So it got disability on the agenda of their own organisations. Through the Disabled Staff Networks, I was able to share best practice from our organisation out into other universities, out into the unions that represent staff in higher education, and also into student societies at different universities as well. So basically a multi-pronged approach here across all levels of academia. And finally, I do participate as a participant in research. So I participate in disability studies and studies on ableism in academia. And I figured that the reason why I do this is because if I'm part of the data, potentially I could be part of the policy that comes out based on that piece of research. So then I started thinking a bit more recently, probably like in the past maybe 2 or 3 years, about whether or not disabled people are represented in population-wide health studies, because that is the domain that I sort of work in. And using this example from the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID vaccine trial, they showed basically on the website whilst the trial was being conducted, you know, they were showing metrics about all the different countries that participants are from for the trial, the diversity in terms of ethnicity and age of participants in the trial. But if you note, there's no mention about participants with chronic health conditions or disability. And try as you might, disability is not something that's usually reported as demographic information or participants in research studies. And the exception is if only if the particular study is relating to a chronic health condition or disability. And so numerous studies kind of assessing this phenomenon showed that disabled people are underrepresented they're absent, or their status is just not known in terms of their participation in research. And it's really summed up well in this quote here, that comprehensive data about the participation of people with disabilities in precision medicine research are not available. And there are reasons why certain chronic health conditions could be excluded. It's because generally, disability or certainly chronic health conditions are exclusion criteria for clinical trials. But also, I don't think that we are making enough efforts to include disabled people in terms of the recruitment into research itself. I think that we do successfully recruit disabled people into disability studies or disability focused chronic health condition focused studies. And so, we need the same sort of effort for population-wide studies in order to have representation. And so without this, we are essentially biasing our research findings towards more healthy patient populations, and that then questions the validity of the research. So I'm just going to skip that slide. So what can we do about this? Well, so I have been lobbying in my sector, in my domain, for the publishing of disability demographics as part of the research publications, as part of the policy, as part of the recommendations coming out of this research space. By publishing the demographics around chronic health conditions and disability, we can start to see what the baseline is for participation in research, and then we can also increase the diversity in those data sets to make sure that we are representative of the population we are studying. I've also proposed strategies to increase the diversity of patients in research studies, and specifically for disability communities to consider the barriers and motivations to participation. For example, the problems of time commitment and potentially a financial or health cost in participation, and suggestions to preempt and address as many of these as possible. A big thing is to improve the language and accessibility of communications, and that's with regards to recruitment into research trials and also the dissemination of the research. So thinking beyond my research sector, I've basically taken every opportunity to engage with the media. As a research expert, I campaign to normalise disability in the media, and because I think that there is a lack of representation of disabled experts in the media. And wherever possible, I will try to participate in, for example, news or TV or radio, print and things like that relating to my research, because I think it's something that is really important to do. Outside of my research, with respect to my lived experience as a disabled person, I am an Access Able ambassador, which means that I write blog posts and social media posts to promote their accessibility guides, which are a really useful tool when you're trying to plan places to go. I also participate in national campaigns showcasing the diversity in STEM careers, and for the past 2 years I featured in the British Science Association Smashing Stereotypes campaign. And coming soon, I will feature in the Women of Science career flashcards, and you'll be able to download those, I think, or you'll be able to access those soon through the womenofsci.com website. In 2020, I was really privileged to have been selected for the Shaw Trust Disability Power 100 list. And this is a list of 100 of the most influential disabled people in Britain. And I was one of just 4 scientists in the science category. And through being part of that network of people, we're linking up and working basically nationally in order to ensure that there is representation and inclusion of disabled people in our respective sectors. And there's a lot of sharing of kind of, I guess, best practice and good ways and good methods of doing things to achieve that. Just my last couple of slides. More recently, probably in the past year to year and a half, I've started participating and engaging in policy work. And this year, or last year, I contributed to the all-party parliamentary group for diversity in STEM. And they ran an inquiry into the equity in the STEM workforce. And I provided evidence from lived experience and also statistical evidence from the higher education sector with respect to both disabled staff and disabled student perspectives. And I do recommend having a look at least the summary of the report and the recommendations, because I think they would be of interest to people, to delegates at this conference. And so those are available at bsa.sc/APPG. The second piece of work that policy work that I've done is contributing to the knowledge exchange unit within the UK Parliament. And this piece of work was centred around coming up with ways to facilitate the diversity of researchers engaging with the UK Parliament. So again, a number of policies have been developed and they are currently being put into action. And so it is great to have contributed to something that will facilitate disabled researchers from participating more and engaging more with Parliament. So I'm going to remind you of something that I said in an earlier slide, that back in 2015, when I first became disabled and I was getting frustrated, I set out to change things and to change things locally in my own organisation. And just over the course of this presentation, I've shown you different aspects of my journey and how I've ended up with opportunities to feed into national policies to affect change as well. So I'm going to end my presentation on a positive note, because whilst I have given a very, I guess, raw and reality facing myself and my personal experiences in academic research, I wanted to end on a positive note to really demonstrate that when you bring together everyone and people work together in an organisational sector to normalise disability in the workplace, it means that you are supported to get on with your work and you can do your job just like everyone else without any barriers. With assistance, you can run, for example, lab work or experiments that are essential and fundamental to your actual research. You can participate in evaluating other people's work, which is a really important part of science. And you can deliver talks at major conferences. And I have to mention and give thanks to Stanford University here, who actually built this ramp so I could get onto the stage and deliver my talk on stage, as opposed to just on the floor at the back of the room. And finally, you can teach that next generation in your sector without any limitations. And after all this, I hope that I've been able to show that this, I guess, multi-pronged campaigning approach that I've made to try and find sustainable and long-term solutions that are future-proof. In practice, this is what it looks like when you have an inclusive working culture and that you're barrier-free. The sky is the limit once again. Thank you.